And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Going for Two, presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, Matt Brown, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I am joined here by Bryan Fischer, my colleague here at D1 Ticker. We are trying to empty out the mailbags, I think, before we head into what's going to be a kind of a weird week for us here. Bryan will be in Las Vegas with every single one of my coworkers for NACDA, talking to every single athletic director and industry professional. I will be here, which sucks, but what can you do?
Such is life nowadays, unfortunately. But we will make up for your absence there in Las Vegas. I checked the weather report. You're not missing anything on that front.
Nope.
But you know what? It'll be some fun. Good to catch up with a lot of folks, especially the ADs that are there at NACDA and a lot of industry folks. But we will certainly be missing you.
Yeah, you just mail me some in and out. We'll see if we can do any interviews.
It's funny you mentioned that because like a few of our colleagues from around the country, they're all coming in, and that was like one of the first things that they mentioned. And having lived in California for over a decade, and obviously having one literally right down the street from my place right now, it's just like, all right, in and out, okay, But
it's one of those things, and I think this is true for just about all regional fast food. That if it's something you get once every 18 months, because that's the only time that you're in that footprint and you can have a little bit of like mystery behind it, it's wonderful. If I lived next to a cookout, could I potentially get sick of cookout? Yeah, probably. But if I only get cookout once every 2 years whenever I'm in North Carolina now, it's a fun experience. I live within jogging distance to a Culver's. So I don't really go to Culver's all that much anymore, especially because I'm trying to finally lose a couple more of these LBs. But when I didn't, that was a big deal, right? Like if you're going up to Wisconsin or whatever, and you get to one of these things. So that's how I feel about it. Like, it's a great fast food burger. Is it something that I expect to be handed from St. Peter when I go to the pearly gates as proof that I have reached the choir invisible? No, it's just a pretty good hamburger. But
I guess it's the same way that I feel when I go back home to Texas or Arizona or someplace that has a Whataburger. I guess that would be similar and same thing.
I didn't think it was that good. Maybe I should have gone at like 1:00 in the morning, but I feel like the whole place is like their thing is like the ketchup, right? If the condiment is part of what you're selling here, maybe the rest of the food isn't that good. But speaking of shitting on Texas here real quick, before we get to some more of your questions, what do you think about this Arch Manning to Texas story, which I'm legally required to ask you about, as it is like the biggest recruiting thing, before we answer some of your questions?
Yeah, I mean, for SEO purposes, we're definitely going to get into it. We're going to put that in the title and everything. I think it's huge for Steve Sarkisian, first of all, in terms of his job security, and it does kind of amp up the pressure there. I mean, landing, quarterback recruits like Quinn Ewers and now Arch Manning. I mean, that certainly provides some job security, but it also raises those expectations through a roof. And, let's face it, it's going to be notable because of the last name, but you talk with anybody in the recruiting industry, you talk with coaches, across the country. I mean, Arch is the real deal, and there's a reason why he is ranked so highly by all the recruiting services in terms of where he's coming out. One of the best prospects. I mean, he's mentioned in the same vein as the Trevor Lawrences and the Andrew Lutz for a reason, not just because of his last name. I think that adds to kind of the cachet, certainly, that he's bringing there to Austin. But and what a move for the program itself as it kind of transitions into the SEC come 2025. I think more than anything, it provides a nice kind of platform for them, and I'm sure recruiting is going to uptick as well. And very interesting. I think this commitment in particular also makes things a lot very interesting, because what have we been talking about most of this summer, and most of the spring? It's been Texas A&M and their recruiting efforts, right? And so now you have Texas making their own shot across the bow. So it definitely makes things very interesting there in the Lone Star State when it comes to recruiting.
The idea that Texas didn't have pressure or like on it before, I think, you're absolutely right that the expectations and pressure ratchet up. This is part of why I think I'm sounding like a hater about all of this, because one, I am, this is not my area of expertise, but I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that Manning is not going to be a really great college quarterback. 5-star quarterbacks wash out all of the time, and high 4-star guys too. But guys who are like 0.99999 or 1.0 recruiting rankings in the recruiting ranking era, they really don't. That's what Vince Young got. That's what Trevor Lawrence got. Justin Fields was very close to there. I mean, of all like the 15 people that were graded out that way, I mean, Brock Berlin is like your worst case scenario, and it's not like he sucked, or like Jimmy Clausen, and Jimmy Clausen was a really good college quarterback. So like I mean, that I'm agree with. What my concern would be, one, Texas has not had a problem recruiting elite talent for years, and even quarterback, where it hasn't quite been as strong as other places. It's not like Hudson Card sucks, or I mean, and he was a very high 4-star recruit. They've had several other ones over the past couple of years, and they haven't been able to develop them into polished, like high level college players over the last 8 years, really, right? And then you're saying, okay, so now you've got this enormously high pressure. You're in a post NIL environment where now not only are boosters, which are legendarily influential at Texas, but now there are contractual commitments and people paying big checks for people to play. And now, one, you don't know whether Hudson or Quinn's going to be your starter. We don't necessarily know who's going. I mean, we kind of know, but there's going to be people pushing for this. I don't know if I can think of a head coach and school combination that I think deserves less of the benefit of the doubt in their ability to navigate high pressure, keep a very talented and conflicted quarterback room happy, and still execute than Texas. And Texas under Sark, where we forget Sark the play caller. I feel very confident that Sark knows what plays to make Texas's offense go vroom vroom. But I know we have some data about what head coach Sark looks like under high pressure environments, and it's not championship caliber. So forgive me for my unbelief. It is a cool story. I hope everybody in Burnt Orange has a wonderful career, but I'm not ready to anoint anybody of anything yet until I see some actual passes thrown and see this team beat Kansas, right? Like if you've lost to Kansas twice in the past couple of years, you don't get to talk mess on the internet anymore. Like that you wait until you actually beat somebody consistently before you get your flowers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, talent and resources have never been quite the issue for at Texas. And, obviously, I think it does kind of speak to what the culture has been like these last couple of years, and the struggles to get that right. I think that really kind of underscores the job that Mac Brown did for so many years, just consistently cranking out double-digit win seasons. And yeah, it kind of fell off the rails there at the end. But I mean, you talk about the consistency of that program, given that all that we've seen. I think there's a good case to be made that Texas is one of the best jobs in the country, but also one of the toughest. You look at the expectations and what they've really accomplished. I mean, this is not an Alabama type program when you look at the trophy case. I think the idea, the concept of Texas football has far exceeded the actual results on the field. And yeah, they've won a lot of games back in the days, but in terms of really delivering those national titles, those big time bowl wins, especially lately, it just has not been there. And I think this is going to be a very interesting move. I mean, let's face it, this is still recruiting, so who even knows if Arch is going to follow through on this, if Texas goes 5-7 again, right? So gonna throw that out there. But like I mean, it is big for the program, and obviously you expect this just going to be the first of many dominoes in terms of Texas recruiting. And like I said, this is big for the SEC in general. I mean, to bring in a Manning to just
could you imagine a Manning playing in the SEC
right?
in this economy?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're ESPN right now and you're looking at Texas joining the league, in 2025, and having a Manning going to play Ole Miss, going to play Texas A&M, going to play Oklahoma, and have those games on ABC, at 3:30, or in prime time on ESPN, like that's big, for a company like that who is paying a lot of money for those SEC rights in going forward. And let's face it, I think more than anything, you just hope that the kid can handle all the pressure. I think that is the bottom line for me is he's got a lot of a lot on his plate just because of that last name, and it seems like he's been handling it pretty well. But you never know when you're in front of 100,000 people every Saturday and you don't have the best of games. It can certainly wear on you, and we've talked a lot about mental health and issues surrounding that for a lot of athletes. Well, this is about the highest profile athlete you can have coming into college that we've seen probably since. Even more so than probably Tim Tebow. So it's going to be an interesting story to track. And certainly, as happy as Texas fans are, they know that this is hopefully going to have to translate into wins for it to pay off.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about the ESPN component here, but just for fun, looking at the top quarterback recruits for 2023, which I think is supposed to be a pretty good year, at least on the top end.
Well, that's the other thing that I think this quarterback commitment is notable for is just the fact that we've had some kind of down years, I guess you could say, in terms of quarterback recruiting. Really, you kind of go back a couple of years. Yeah, there's like the Trevor Lawrence class, and then it really kind of trailed off. Not really those elite prospects. We saw it kind of have that domino effect toward the NFL, this past year in the NFL, that not quite that can't miss prospect at quarterback. The same is true in recruiting. You just have down years in terms of the crop of high school seniors that are graduating and maybe not quite having the measurables or quite having the film. And I think that's certainly not the case come 2023, because this is far from although Arch has that perfect score in terms of the recruiting, there are a lot of other very good quarterbacks. We obviously saw Notre Dame's in for one, Michigan's in for a couple. Like, this is a lot of programs are kind of hitching their wagon, so to speak, to this class of 2023, because there's some pretty good prospects in it.
There are, but on that note though, just kind of thinking about this from a media rights perspective, right? Arch Manning's your top guy right now going to Texas. Malachi Nelson, number 2, Los Angeles kid, like number 2 prospect period, USC. And the other 5-star quarterback, like very close in terms of like all 3 of these guys, Tennessee. So that's a second SEC person. Dante Moore is like, I think the only guy of the top 10 who's in the Big Ten footprint. He's right now likely to go to Oregon, but then you've got Oklahoma and Alabama and South Carolina, all likely to grab top 10 quarterback recruits here. The Big Ten is not slated to get a single kid in the top 10 for quarterbacks. And guess what school currently has number 11? It's your top ranked quarterback in the Big Ten for this class. Guess what school has them? I don't think you'll get it right.
I'm going to throw out Penn State, maybe.
Nope. Purdue. With Ricky Collins, a Louisiana kid. Ohio State, like Penn State has somebody who's like ranked 22nd. Ohio State might be getting a 3-star kid in this class. Like this is a on the high end. Great quarterbacks. They're all going to the Pac-12, which is good for that conference because they need their high-end guys to get high-end talent. The high-end ACC and the SEC. Not to say that like, I don't know if that matters, big picture media-wise. Ohio State signed a stud quarterback last cycle. So did Michigan. But
yeah,
it's almost all ESPN. For that group of guys.
Line true of 2022 kids, 2024 kids. There's a lot of highly regarded prospects. So it's like a nice little quarterback boom right now, and it's going to be interesting too. Not just throwing NIL and all that stuff in there, but basically a lot of these guys are walking on campus expecting to start right away as true.
They have to,
and if not, they're transferring. So it's like you mentioned those Big Ten schools not necessarily getting in. This might be the first crack of the apple at getting some of those talented quarterbacks on campus. They might not pan out at the school they're committed to right now, but they could still end up at a big school down the road, knowing that there might be some openings for some starting quarterbacks who need some filling, and maybe some of these guys end up doing that.
There's no might about it. That's just the way that this looks. Like every year, like there's somebody in the top 10, if not multiple somebody's in the top 10. Are going to end up transferring, right? Like, looking at like I think the last cycle we've got anything here with like 2020 and under quarterbacks. Like, is Hudson Card going to end up transferring if he's not your starter at Texas or Jackson? Like, yeah, probably. Or you're going to have a high level guy at Washington leave if they haven't. I mean, we've already had people leave at Oregon and A&M. Like, you can't keep 3 top 50 quarterbacks in one room anymore. The second one guy has to wait more than 1 year, they leave. That's not a criticism or anything. That's why and that's why if you're Texas, sign as many really good guys as you can, because it's better to have them and then lose them than to not get them at all. Like that's where we are. We can talk quarterback dominoes a little bit more maybe in a month or so as we get into some conference previews. We have a better idea where everybody's going. We did want to take this chance to answer a couple of other mailbag questions. We haven't done that on the podcast in a minute. We've done it with the newsletter. So we had a couple of questions that people sent to me from the newsletter that I haven't had a chance to answer yet, and a few other ones that we got here on social media. As you can imagine, some of those are going to be realignment-ish, but I want to hit one that kind of dovetails into my recent reporting on the EA Sports video game. This comes from Going for Two listener New Handle Dre, who asks, how does the copyright stuff work for like a Kanye song or even Disney properties like the school band playing the Imperial March from Star Wars? Great question, because as you would imagine, the people that own the copyright to Kanye's music are not Oregon. It's not Oregon State football, even if Oregon State or BYU or whoever plays Kanye's song pregame. The reason this is coming up is because last week I reported that EA Sports has asked participating schools to submit this big old spreadsheet of musical assets that they use during games. So if some of that's going to be your fight song, or the equivalent of the Oklahoma band playing Boomer Sooner 700 times over the course of a broadcast, right? It asks you to fill in when you typically play things, but also what music you might play during the third quarter. Many schools will, like Wisconsin's going to play Jump Around. And so like that's going to be part of it, right? Or maybe you play Sweet Caroline, maybe you play Seven Nation Army, maybe you play a couple of particular songs as part of the pregame experience every single time. And EA is like, we want to make the most authentic thing possible. So send us all of that. The reason they're asking people now, or to be honest, when they asked like last March, so a couple of months ago for this, is because EA is actually planning on spending the money to clear copyright for as many of those as possible. So then the way, as I've been told from on the school and the EA side, is that schools send all the assets right now, and then EA is going to spend the next 12 months figuring out what they can afford and how they can go through clearinghouses to allow that. So you're going to hear some, actual bands, like their music, if it's part of like the pregame broadcast, like EA's, the Electronic Arts and CLC, they're going to pay to use that. Will they be able to do that for every like Disney, just like Darth Vader song? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, maybe because Disney's kind of in bed with this project. Maybe they cut them a break. I don't know. They may not be able to get everything, but that is the advantage of being an extremely wealthy, gigantic video game publisher. Is you can pay a couple of extra bucks so you can hear "Don't Back Down" or "Won't Back Down" if you're playing on Florida, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the soundtrack was one of the best parts of the old NCAA video game, right? And not just the school fight songs, but listening to some recent music, that was a good exposure. And nowadays, especially because of the way things are, you can turn some of those soundtracks into purchases and send send people to other stores. So like it's a revenue opportunity for EA as well. So I think that's going to be interesting to a subplot, I guess you could say, to this game is kind of curious if they're going to license all this, if they're going to kind of focus on some major brands and just kind of go from there. But it's definitely going to be something to kind of think about for them. But the bottom line is, if you're playing this game, I think you're going to be ecstatic about just the reality and the feel that it's going to have. Not just
going to be very realistic.
Not just invoking those old memories of playing the games if you're old enough to have an old copy, but like just getting into the atmosphere. And I think they're going to do a great job in terms of making sure that pops, especially on these new next gen consoles, that they can turn the realism setting up to 11.
Yeah, I mean, so to give some specific examples, I know, for example, when Kentucky submitted their paperwork, and I got this through an open records request, got it confirmed. I guess if you're watching a Kentucky game in Lexington, other team commits a penalty, you hear the Law and Order dun dun sound, right? They have asked EA to pay for the Law and Order sound. I don't think they're the only school that does that. So maybe you can get a discount by licensing it across a couple of different, venues. That level of realism is there. Like I talked to the BYU today, and they said, yeah, we asked to license multiple Kanye West songs because we play those before the game starts. And I know when I think of Kanye West, I definitely think of Utah County. Yes. But right, I mean, increasingly, that's not a joke anymore in a couple of different ways. But like they said, that was part of the deal. I'm trying to find out a few more of these because I know fans are interested in them. But chances are, if you've been to your home stadium several times, you can probably guess what kinds of licenses they're asking for. As I get more of these, I will report them on extrapointsnb.com.
Yeah, and I think related to that too is just speaking of the realism factor. What I can't wait to see. You mentioned playing Jump Around. Like seeing that and how they kind of bring that to life, or the lighting of the torch at the Coliseum when USC plays at the end of the third quarter. Like some of those real cool moments that you have at stadiums that really add to the atmosphere. That's what I'll be looking for. Those kind of moments.
Yeah, these are examples of some of the kind of things that I think, honestly, the franchise did pretty admirably on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 Like I was
Given
talking
the
with
technical limitations. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, like I was talking with somebody who was at Boise State, like a licensing person there. Like, look, on the PS2, we had some like random home remodeling company like park a trailer in our on one of our sidelines of like an unfinished living room to sell furniture, and people could watch the game in there. We managed to render that on a PS2. Imagine what kind of goofy stuff we could do on a PS5, because you couldn't do that with some of the audio assets. You couldn't render the rest of the stadium the same way. And I can't promise you, but the gameplay is going to be perfect. I wish I could. I don't work for EA. They haven't given me a demo yet. My email is matt@extrapointsnba.com if you want to do that. My gamer, my gamer tag. But I do feel pretty confident saying it's going to be very realistic in terms of trying to take the experience that you get at your stadium, whether you're at App State or Akron or Alabama, and re-render it to your Xbox. In non-video game questions, this was, I think, a pretty interesting one from reader Kenny C. Asks, due to the increasing frequency of major weather events and rising temperatures later in the year, have any schools started looking at renovating their stadiums to mitigate those issues? Not every team can kick off at night. The answer to that question is yes. One place where this is coming up more is in new building construction. And this varies a little bit depending on where you are. If you are in a potential floodplain area or right on the coast, is this coming up in your building management plans more than it would have in 1983? Yes. Like you have to model what happens to the structural integrity of this facility if sea level rises by X, Y, or Z, or global temperatures rise by 1.5 C in 15 years. When you're building this, you want it to last for 30, 40, 50 years. That's something you have to think about. The kinds of building material that's used, both not just from a sustainability perspective, but in terms of being able to dissipate heat, I have also been told is a regular conversation. Now, how you can retrofit and make changes to existing facilities is a challenge, especially on the football side, because, Bryan, I know you know this, but many of our listeners might not. A lot of these stadiums are just stupid old. So many college football stadiums are built right after World War I or World War II. Some of these were like, Works Progress Administration, FDR helped build these things, right? And so while you've added luxury boxes and Diet Pepsi machines and some other places, the skeleton of the building is 100 years old. And so there's only so much you can do with some kind of concrete without redoing the entire thing, which I can tell you the appetite for doing that right now is 0% anywhere, because this is a terrible time to build a stadium. This is a time when if you can put it off 15 years, you're going to try to do that with inflation and shortages, not just in supplies, but also labor. Like, you want to try to postpone some of those things. You may have heard differently. One concern that I have had raised to me by some administrators, beyond just trying to change the actual building themselves, is what can we do to give ourselves additional flexibility in our schedules, particularly for football, particularly in the Southeast or East Coast, because not just hurricane season, which is going to be a thing every year now, but also thunderstorms and just high rain and high wind and lightning can postpone or cancel or change almost any game on the schedule for the first 6 weeks of the season. And so if that means, trying to build in some flexibility at the beginning of the year to move a conference game, or some flexibility to potentially play a game on a Sunday, if you absolutely have to, given stadium availability, those are questions being asked more. What else have you heard on this front?
Well, I would just say, for the folks that are in operations and, kind of tasked with coming up with plans for a lot of that. I mean, a lot of it's just kind of out of their hands in terms of the building itself, and not just being old or having issues with, sewer lines and all that. But like, honestly, it's mostly a manpower issue. When you have police or local resources that are diverted to storm preparedness, or you're making sure that people are right if there's a hurricane coming or things like that. I mean, honestly, that's the biggest trip up for a lot of these games. Not necessarily if they're like stadium is ready to host 50,000 people coming in. So I think it's kind of important to keep in mind there's just like the human element and the local infrastructure element that also has to be considered. And in terms of new stadium construction, is absolutely a big deal to not just make sure that they can withstand being around for 50 years, but withstand the elements and withstand even greater elements that we're even kind of looking at right now, given sea temperature rises and, everything that's going on with global warming. So it is definitely being considered. You talk with folks at a lot of these architecture firms, they're kind of baking that in terms of the design of a lot of these buildings. And, you're right. A lot of stadiums are just old, almost too old to kind of retrofit at this point. And so, finding space for new avenues. I mean, even you go across the pond and you look at some of the difficulties they have in terms of rebuilding some of those stadiums across Europe. Same thing here in terms of football, basketball,
they're smaller.
Yeah, I mean, various, pretty much anything considered, any building that's going up on campus is definitely, looking at a lot of this stuff. And as much as you want to mitigate it and try to put some of that the ultimate limiting factor, a lot of times it's just, frankly, making sure those local resources are there to host that amount of people on your campus. And for a lot of these schools too, I mean, there's been discussions about, particularly in football, is maybe starting a lot of those schools in the Southeast because of the hurricane season a week earlier, at week 0, building in that flexibility to where, they would have 2 bye weeks, but because the way the schedule falls, there's the possibility to where they would have to, shift some of those games to later in the year and take away those bye weeks. It's something that comes up every single year, especially along those schools for the coast. And so mitigating it as best they can, but also, trying to kind of plan ahead is a challenge for pretty much every administrator on campus, come football, basketball season, whatever it might be.
Was it last year or the year before where we had a game at the beginning of the year in Fresno where sneakers were actually melting because it was so hot at field level?
Well, I mean, in Arizona, you're basically, it's like a local ordinance, so you can't even play. And so that's something that they deal with. I know it's a sense of frustration at times, but certainly for a lot of these schools, you just got to deal with the local elements, especially early in the fall where it is so hot, even later in the year. I mean, heck, we're only a couple of months removed from, Gene Smith and a few folks in the Big Ten, complaining about through the college football playoff expansion, the weather elements, and hosting some of those games in the middle of December at some of their stadium, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum for sure compared to hurricane season. But it's something that everybody considers. And there's meticulous planning involved in a lot of these elements and having those things. And even things you wouldn't think about. You mentioned rainstorms earlier. I mean, what are your donors going to do if they're tailgating outside and there is some massive rainstorms for 3 or 4 hours? You don't want to ruin their experience of coming to a game, hopefully spending some money on concessions and then writing a big old check for donations later on after you get that big win over a ranked opponent. Thinking about how you can kind of plan for things as well and having those alternatives is something that pretty much every school in the country is doing on a pretty consistent basis.
Speaking of things that are very old and maybe difficult to change, let me quickly highlight our good friends at Home Field Apparel, the manufacturers of unique, extremely comfortable collegiate apparel using designs from yesteryear, including designs that you might have forgotten. We've waxed rhapsodic on this program about the new designs at TCU, A+++. Arizona, A++. Clemson, as strong as it could possibly be, given that color scheme and given everything about Clemson, excellent, right? I'm wearing a purple shirt here right now. I'm wearing my Washington, bow down to Washington shirt. This is a very pro dog. Good dogs today. Showcase. Big fan of this shirt because my daughters attend an elementary school whose mascot is the Huskies. And they are very excited to see the good dog here on my chest. They're not dogs this week. They are Cougars of Washington State, which I think we've all established is everybody's at least third favorite college football program, because Pullman exemplifies everything that is extremely college football about college football. It's in the middle of nowhere. They play weird hours of the night. Bizarre things happen to them. They have a campus creamery that makes outstanding cheese, and they'll mail it to you in a little tin. Are they going to win the Rose Bowl? Probably not, but they look really cool, and they've got some really great designs, and you should go to homefieldapparel.com and you should go buy some of them, like I will, even though I have promised to stop buying home field stuff. So please go to Extra Points and buy a subscription so I can afford to buy some more t-shirts to feed my addiction here. And then also, when you go buy your own t-shirts, which you should do because they look great, use promo code Extra Points. All one word, save 15% off your order. Let our friends at Homefield know that we're good partners, so they should give us money, which we should then exchange for Homefield stuff. It's the foundation of the global economy, right?
Absolutely. And finally, Couganet has a positive connotation this week.
That's right. That's right. People forget that. Yeah, I recognize the irony here of me shilling for Washington State while I'm wearing a Washington shirt right now. To
It's
Brian
just like
Floyd,
because
I apologize.
we just don't care, you know. Like we only care about the soft shirts and everybody using our promo code extra points.
That's right. I love everybody because my alma mater is not yet licensed by Home Field Apparel. Yet. We'll see if that changes. Anybody at American University, if you're listening, also please get on Home Field, and I will be your most enthusiastic salesperson on Twitter.com. A couple other questions we've got here. Reader Eric asks, I know you guys discuss a lot of conference realignment, but after the dust settles from this wave, this is a slightly different question. Which G5 conference do you think will ultimately be able to get the largest TV contract? Will it still be the American post the departing institutions? This is a good question here. And what I can say is I know what the American is saying, and I know what people in the television industry are telling me, and they're not the same thing. What, as best as I understand it, everybody from the American in public has said, we believe our ESPN contract that runs through the end of this decade will remain the same, despite the fact that our three best programs have since departed, and we have now replaced them with a bunch of mostly very developing programs that do not have anywhere near the established fan base of Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. Part of this argument is because there's simply more schools. So it's more conference inventory, and like that will be the make good for ESPN. I understand that argument is theoretically possible. I haven't seen the deal. I'm not Burke Magnus. I didn't write these things, right? So if they're saying this, they may not be lying. They may very well know something that we don't. That's which happens, right? The other people that I've talked to in the television, like in the media rights industry, both other athletic directors who have considered being a part of the American or work for companies that produce valuations or that check this kind of thing. What I've heard from that group is there's no way in hell that you can keep that without some significant concessions on some other end, because the inventory, even if you have more of it, is simply not valuable. And even if you're throwing all this stuff on ESPN Plus, guys, even when UCF was playing on ESPN Plus, those broadcasts were bringing in 4,000 or 5,000 people. And the number of people that are going to go watch a Tulsa, North Texas game on ESPN Plus, it's going to be 1,000 people. It's going to be a tiny audience, and it will take a long time for some of those other developmental brands to grow. And so, given what we know what other brands are worth, that wouldn't be worth $6.8 million or whatever the actual distribution is. Who's telling the truth? I don't know. We'll keep filing foibles and we'll look at the FRS reports, but that's what I've been told on the American side. Does that jive with what you have been hearing? Judging by your facial expression right now, I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same conversation we have with the Big 12, right? After Texas and Oklahoma depart, are and Fox, et cetera, when they go to the table, are they going to still get the same amount?
No chance. No chance.
No, they aren't. And so I think
get half.
That is kind of the story when it comes to kind of group of five, and obviously the Big 12 rights coming up is just kind of how much they can get. And if they're level, I mean, they will be lucky as can be in order to get that. And, on the bright side for a conference like the American, you are bringing in schools that have invested, recently in their football programs, like that they're located in major metro areas that are tend to be growing. Like there's a reason why, people want to go to school there, and they're universities that have had some success, in the past, and so kind of have put that on the plate and try to guss it up as nice as you can get, but it's just not going to come close to having it, especially having the success recently that the Cincinnati's, the UCFs of the world have had. And I would imagine that there will be some concessions made. I would imagine if you're the American, you're probably looking at extending your current deal with ESPN until the 2030s, if nothing else, to kind of put in some grant of rights and some negotiations around that.
Yeah, and that's already not a good deal, but yeah.
But like ESPN holds the cards here, and to me, the more interesting thing when it comes to Group of Five rights, in particular, is ultimately what is the Sun Belt going to get? Because you talk about kind of a conference that is on the way up. When they come back to the table in a couple of years, how are they viewed? Or are they going to be kind of that second or third best, Group of Five conference? And I think more than anything, it's also important to kind of keep in mind that no matter what happens in terms of the media rights component, a lot of these conferences are still going to get a bump in terms of their college football playoff revenue payouts. So at least it's made up for a little bit, but it's still just going to pale in comparison to the Big Ten schools, the SEC schools, even the Pac-12 and the ACC. There's going to be such a wide gap, and I think that's why, frankly, there's been so much talk, especially lately with the transformation committee, over ultimately what is kind of FBS football, what is FCS football, what is Division One. Like these are kind of questions that are all kind of interrelated, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see kind of play out, and especially as these media companies make that transition more to a direct-to-consumer model. Are they really going to value a fan base like Rice as much as they would, knowing that they have a bunch of TV households in the Houston market? Probably not. So that's the other thing to kind of keep in mind.
The other, I think, important question about media rights here, to me, the final number is not as interesting to me as the exposure and the kind of concessions that have to happen. Because like even when outside of the AAC's deal, whether it's the Sun Belt, MAC, Conference USA, whatever, like best case scenario you're looking at, if you're not Boise State, like maybe $2.5 million per institution per year, and that might not include production costs. So you might have to set aside some of that to actually run your facility and send out cameras and everything, which is the case for the American. That's the case for a lot of ESPN Plus kind of productions. So you're right. You're getting more money from the college football playoff, or perhaps potentially your MMR or other distributions than you are television. The television difference, Sunbelt CUSA, Sunbelt MAC, Sunbelt Media and MWC team, not exorbitant. The telling thing though is how many of your games are going to be on linear television on channels that people actually have versus streaming. How many of your games that are on streaming are on platforms that people actually have and can easily access versus others, right? It's different to have your stuff on ESPN Plus in terms of pure accessibility than it is Paramount or Flow or Facebook or some other potential third-party platform. What do you have to concede to your TV partners in terms of kickoff time control and kickoff date, right? The MAC has to play half their conference games on Tuesday and Wednesday, which is nice for television exposure, sucks for anybody that actually wants to go to a game, and also sucks for the weather, right? Not a lot of people live in Bowling Green, Ohio, and they typically would have to drive 2 hours. Ain't nobody doing that on a Tuesday. So the television looks like a terrible high school production. Even like really good conference games are there. If you're the American of the Sun Belt, maybe you have a little bit more clout to push for something different. If you're the Mountain West, you've been told you're playing at night and you're liking it. And we don't care that it's -5 in Laramie and that people have to drive, bring chains in their truck for the drive home to get through the snow and everything, because this is where you fit with our broadcast. So I think it would honestly be in the best interest of like a G5 league that wants to say that like they're the premier league for football. And quite frankly, like I think over a 5-year period, who the premier G5 football league is I don't know. Like just for anybody to say like one has an overwhelming advantage over the other, I think you're being partisan. I don't think there's a gigantic difference the way these are laid out right now. Might change in a couple of years, right? But I think it would be in their best interest to say we retain the most control and have the most exposure versus the most money, because we're going to come down very soon where you'd much rather have access to more households and sell more tickets than get an extra $300,000 from ESPN. And who wins that? I don't know the answer to it yet, but that's a more interesting question.
And a question that's going to affect the Power 5 level. I mean, you look at the Pac-12 in particular. I think that's something when they're currently kind of at the table with a lot of their media rights partners already in terms of some of these early discussions. But like kicking off those late games, I mean, definitely a sore point for a lot of Pac-12 schools. When if you're Oregon, you have a lot of your fan base coming from Portland, a couple hours away. Like those 7:30 kickoffs, even at 5 o'clock, that's tough. You're forcing a lot of folks to probably get a hotel, in which, let's face it, there's limited amount of those in places like Eugene, and it's rough. It's rough as an athletic department when you're talking about donor relations. Obviously, selling tickets, not just in terms of your walk-ups, but your season tickets, making sure that they're arriving and filling those seats and spending money on concessions and taking back some of that control is definitely going to be a part of the discussions surrounding the Pac-12 and their packages that they're going to end up selling. And you can definitely understand that they might take some added flexibility, even if it's coming at the cost a little bit of that exposure. And
that's exactly right.
And so I think that's going to be a big thing for George Kliavkoff, but it's also going to be something for the SEC. I mean, this is the reason why they kind of push to kind of go all in with ESPN. It does allow them to kind of set some of those game times a little bit earlier. Obviously, they'll have a number of different slots across ESPN and ABC. And so, for teams that maybe they would have gotten stuck with that 7:30 kickoff, a couple years ago, now you can at least kind of mitigate that because you can plan a little bit further ahead. I know they made a big deal when they announced that they would set kickoff times much more in advance, no more 7 or 10 day windows like they have been kind of used to. And so that's a big thing though. If you're those athletic departments, just from a planning standpoint, if you're a season ticket holder, that's a big thing. And that is kind of the great promise certainly of streaming, is that you're not really locked into one particular TV window, right? And so
you can do whatever you want.
And I mean, this is a good reason why a lot of those, those FCS games on ESPN Plus, they're kicking off at noon, because that is when that fan base, when that school wants them to play, and that's a big thing for. I know a lot of ADs, and I'm sure it's being communicated to a lot of these conference offices as they go back to the table to negotiate some of these deals.
Two quick questions here before we wrap it up and give you something here to listen to for the weekend. One, this is a permeation of like 3 different questions that I was asked about conference realignment, which happens every time I open up a mailbag, which is fine. Let me tell you the truth. Friends, we are in a dead period. Now that Howard, according to our friends at HBCU Game Day and Hero Sports, and I have heard this now independently myself, has indicated they're sticking around the MEAC for at least 1 more year. Don't expect any changes for several months. The places that are actively on the hunt right now are the NEC, the MAAC, the MAC, and America East. It's all in New England. They're fishing from similar Division II, MEAC, potentially even one Division III institution. But no one's going to make any changes right now. They want to. I mean, getting everybody back from vacation was hard enough. They're focused on transformation. They're focused on a bunch of conference administrative stuff that they've been postponing for a couple of months. There will be more news later, but the incentive to get a lot of this stuff done very quickly has wrapped up. The last recruiting, the last realignment cycle is over. Last very quick question comes here from reader Josh, who asks, what are you hearing from the college sports industry about group licensing? I know you talk a lot about EA Sports, but what's the industry sentiment on group licensing? What I can tell you is that among very large org companies like a Fanatic kind of company or an apparel company, they love it. They wish there was more of it. They wish there was more of it that was centralized. If you are in business with the NFL or the NBA or the WNBA, you love that there's one entity that you work with, and you're prepared to pay a little bit more for the logistical privilege of only dealing with one guy. In college, you're dealing with a cajillion people. You might be dealing with every school's individual group licensing mechanism. Maybe you have to deal with individual athletes or conferences. Sometimes if you're lucky with just the schools, you can work with CLC and then kind of do the handful of one-offs. But for anything on the player side, it's a gigantic pain in the ass. It's getting easier with One Team and Brandar and some other companies being involved in this space, but it's developing. I think it's going to be more centralized and easier in 2 or 3 years than it is right now. And anybody that makes products that are aligned in this world want it that way. The other very quick thing I'll say is just, hey, if you're an agent, if you're an athlete or anybody else, just so you know, athletes don't make very much money from group licensing. If you're selling a jersey right now with your name on it, you're making like $8. So, I mean, this is something I've heard as a source of frustration for people in this business, where agents or players will call them up and ask them, why aren't we doing jerseys? Why aren't we doing baseball cards? Why aren't we doing X, Y, or Z? And then if they actually do, why am I not making a lot of money? It's like, nobody really makes a lot of money from the season in the pros too, man. Like you still do it. It's still something. And schools are happy to do it because they're going to sell more of whatever trinket if the player's on it than if they're not. But this is not going to be the pillar of anybody's NIL or revenue strategy. It's not the way the margins on this business work. There's a lot higher costs than you might think.
Absolutely. And I think that's why there's going to be increasing chatter over I think the coming months and years, just of having the potential for athletes to have some sort of collective bargaining agreement, some sort of players association, if you want, on the college level, that would allow them to opt in for a lot of these agreements, because it is a messy thing in terms of group licensings, and anything that can make it easier, especially when, the average 18-year-old freshman coming into college, they know nothing about group licensing. And even if the star quarterback, the Arch Mannings, to bring it back around to the start of this podcast, like they're hiring, very, very high priced attorneys just to help navigate some of these agreements. And it's not for all that much money. And so, I think that's the one area where this industry really has some structural problems that it faces. When it comes to just dealing with a lot of this. I mean, the whole sport is so fractured, between conferences, divisions, all that, and then trying to get something done, across the party lines, so to speak. I mean, it's just tough, and that's why a lot of these companies, I mean, they just don't want to deal with it. It's just easier to kind of go, all right, well, yeah, I'm going to have to pay a little bit extra to go to the NFLPA to get their license. But you know what? It's so much simpler. And I know I can make a profit on that because the NFL is the most watched sport in the country. So as much as college football has a lot of growth opportunity ahead, things like this kind of hold it back a little bit.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're going to see the group license for EA Sports come out. I believe this summer, like that's what I've been hearing. I'm almost positive it's going to be one team that ends up being the administrator behind setting that up. But that industry has a lot of room to mature. We're going to talk about, I think, group licensing more over the next couple of weeks. This is something I've been kind of kicking around here. I am working on now that I'm finally kind of getting my sea legs under me again after travel and being sick, some other reporting that I'm excited to share. It's been a big week already on Collegiate Sports Connect. I have an interview on there with the CEO of the College Football Hall of Fame. If you're interested in that world, I have the CEO of a company that's helping to produce digital autographs and what that world looks like for athletes and schools. I'm going to have an interview with the Division III conference that is accepting Hartford, who is reclassifying from Division I to Division III. We have some stuff about Boise State beach volleyball, and where I'm asking some serious professionals about why the sand isn't blue. You can find all of that. Brian's been doing a bunch of other videos about a bunch of other, administrative topics that I think you'll enjoy. And then a lot of NACTA stuff is going to be on there. You might see me once or twice, maybe not. You'll definitely see Bryan and a lot of our colleagues talking to athletic directors and industry leaders about what the hell is going on right now. You'll be able to find all of that for free on Collegiate Sports Connect. You can, of course, also make sure that you're subscribing to the show wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Click the subscribe button, steal the phones of your elderly relatives, subscribe on there, give 5-star reviews on either of those platforms as well, strangers you don't know. All of that's wonderful because that helps people find the show, helps us communicate to sponsors so we should continue to produce the show. And then, of course, check out Extra Points, extrapointsnb.com, the newsletter that makes all of this possible. Safe travels, Bryan. Have fun. Learn a lot. See if we can go find some people to go talk to us this week. And when we come back, I can't wait to hear all about it.
There will be plenty to download and digest here on the podcast. Maybe we'll even tape an episode with some folks there in Las Vegas. But a lot going on, a lot of content coming out of that event, and it will be good to get some ADs in the hot chair and see what they think. But follow D1 Ticker, Collegiate Sports Connect for all that, and I will see you next week, my friend.
All right, take it easy, and thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you on the internet.